There are certain rules to tunnel warfare. Don't turn on the light unless you're really, really, really sure you're alone. Use your senses. Do your first killing as quietly as you can. That means don't shoot.
He crawled into hell with nothing but a pistol and a flashlight and came out a legend. While most soldiers fought in the jungles of Vietnam, a select few volunteered for a nightmare beneath the surface. They were called tunnel rats, small, agile, and fearless men sent into the Viet Cong's underground labyrinths, where every inch was a death trap. Booby traps, tripwires, snakes, scorpions, silent killers who knew every tunnel like the back of their hand.
10 or 15 very angry scorpion spiders. There was a bamboo snake. We found this a couple of times.
There was no backup, no room to run, and no guarantee of coming out alive. Armed with just a gun and raw nerve, tunnel rats fought in pitch-black silence, clearing booby-trapped bunkers and flushing out enemies buried deep below the jungle floor. The tunnels stretched for miles, housing weapons, hospitals, and war rooms, and one mistake meant being buried alive. Their war was dirty, claustrophobic, and personal. But among these already elite soldiers, one man earned a reputation so terrifying, even the Viet Cong gave him a name. This is the story of the most feared tunnel rat of the Vietnam War. The Underground War, tunnel rats in Vietnam. There were several fronts in the Vietnam War, from open rice paddies to thick jungles, but one of the most horrific battlegrounds was underground. A specialist cadre of soldiers operated in a cramped, dark world of tunnels, narrow, serpentine channels that were the backbone of Viet Cong resistance, while regular infantry battalions attacked the enemy above ground. With only a flashlight and a sidearm, these men, known as tunnel rats, volunteered for what many saw as a death mission, breaking into, cleaning, and demolishing enemy underground systems. Particularly in areas like Cu Chi, where more than 150 miles of underground tunnels had been hand-dug, the Viet Cong's tunnel networks were engineering wonders. These weren't just layovers. They were fully operational subterranean facilities with command centers, living quarters, hospitals, armories, and even propaganda printing presses. With artificial walls and concealed trapdoors to confound invaders, some tunnels went down many stories. Ventilation tunnels disguised as termite mounds kept the air breathable, and the systems were built with severe angles to keep gunshot or shrapnel from getting far. These tunnels were a tactical marvel because they allowed the Viet Cong to move covertly, execute surprise attacks, and disappear before a response could be planned. But the tunnels were a headache for the Americans who had to clear them. Access spots were only narrow enough for a small-framed man to get through, and once inside, one could only move by crawling or crouching. Only the faint illumination of a flashlight, a signal that also made its bearer a potential target, broke the total blackness. The smell of rotting corpses, human excrement, and wet dirt filled the air. The Viet Cong had made the tunnels into death traps. There were traps everywhere, wooden boxes with live scorpions or poisonous snakes, trenches with pointed bamboo stakes, and tripwires attached to bombs. According to some tunnel rats, they saw bamboo vipers purposefully positioned on ceilings, ready to fall on gullible bystanders. The tunnel rat was a specific kind of soldier. Most were volunteers, and their small stature, usually under 5 feet 6 inches, was not a preference, but a necessity. They operated in groups, frequently with little more than 8 people, and showed remarkable independence in their methods. Standard army weaponry was useless underground, so they changed their loadouts to include .38 caliber revolvers for reliability in tight spaces, sawed-off shotguns for lethality in close quarters, and knives for silent slaughter. To flush out hostile soldiers, some used gas masks to discharge tear gas, while others employed stealth, listening for the slightest sounds of movement in the dark. There was almost no communication with the surface. Prior efforts used trailing communication cables, but they were isolated from tunnel rats because they tangled with rocks and roots. Soldiers examined headlamps but decided against using them since they were easy targets. Their senses were their only trustworthy instruments. They could use their hands to feel for tripwires, listen for breathing, or detect changes in air currents. There was a huge psychological cost. Disorientation, claustrophobia, and the continual threat of ambush drove even the hardest soldiers down. Many tunnel rats left after just a few missions, but others who remained had an almost magical sense of their environment. The Viet Cong had the upper hand since they knew every inch of their tunnels. They might wait for hours and attack at the most inconvenient times for the tunnel rats. To look around corners without being seen, some people utilized curved mirrors. Others used psychological warfare to frighten their adversaries, such as whispering, rapping on walls, or even playing recorded screams. Before moving on, tunnel rats learned to travel carefully and systematically through each section. Some created their gimmicks, such as attaching lamps on long poles to attract enemy fire and then precisely returning it. Even though tunnel rats were extremely dangerous, they worked incredibly well. They discovered crucial intelligence, such as maps showing enemy movements and documents detailing murder plots. In certain instances, they discovered whole stockpiles of weaponry or subterranean maintenance shops. Their actions caused the enemy to give up important tunnel networks and interfered with the Viet Cong supply lines. However, the price was steep. Tunnel rats had startlingly high death rates, and chance was frequently just as important to survival as talent. In a world where traditional strategies were useless, the tunnel rats fought a battle of quiet and shadows. Their influence was indisputable, yet their efforts seldom ever made news. They transformed the enemy's greatest advantage into a battlefield where bravery and resourcefulness were more important than weaponry by breaking into the Viet Cong's underground bunkers. Vietnam's tunnels continue to serve as a reminder of both the individuals who ventured inside them and the ruthless inventiveness of war. Inside the Viet Cong's subterranean fortress, the Cu Chi Tunnel Network. The Cu Chi tunnels were a whole secret world, not just holes in the earth. Imagine squeezing into an area so small that you are unable to turn around, where every shadow may be a trap, where the air smells like perspiration and moist ground. For the Viet Cong who occupied the area, as well as the American tunnel rats dispatched to expel them, this was the situation. The tunnels created a subterranean city spanning more than 150 kilometers. There were arm factories that turned American dud shells into functional grenades, clinics where doctors operated by candlelight, and even theaters that staged political plays to raise spirits. The Viet Cong lived in these tunnels, often for months at a time, rather than merely hiding there. To go about it, you had to know the mysteries of the system. Some tunnels were 3 stories deep and connected by secret trap doors. From above, vent shafts resembled organic anthills. From printing mills producing political brochures to rice supply, storage facilities housed everything. Narrow escape pathways allowed for rapid disappearances once Americans found an entry, but the bigger rooms could accommodate dozens of combatants. The purpose of the tunnels was to murder trespassers. If you go down the incorrect corridor, you might set off a tripwire-wired explosive, locate a box of scorpions, and reach for a handhold. To ensure infection, some traps only employed bamboo stakes that had been sharpened and soiled with human feces. Even poisonous snakes that the Viet Cong strung from ceilings were ready to fall on anyone walking by below. All of the senses were turned into weapons for the Americans who were pushed into this horror. You tasted the air for the metallic tinge of a freshly dug trap, listened for breathing in the dark, and felt for changes in the dirt walls that could indicate a secret entryway. By learning when to go quickly, when to freeze, and when to turn around, the finest tunnel rats gained a sixth sense regarding danger. It was not just the tunnel's architecture that worked so well, but also the way they capitalized on people's concerns. The darkness weighed down on them like a tangible burden. You might be able to hear your heartbeat in the absolute quiet. Additionally, you constantly know that someone may be waiting for you to make a mistake somewhere in that darkness. The Viet Cong created a psychological weapon in addition to tunnels. The purpose of every narrow passageway and concealed peril was to annihilate anyone put down there. For the tunnel rats, being successful required more than just proficiency with a gun. It required the capacity to maintain composure when all of their instincts begged them to flee. An opponent that refused to fight on American terms and who exploited psychology and geography just as successfully as guns, this subterranean network became the ideal representation of the Vietnam War itself. The Viet Cong were able to attack, vanish, and endure in the face of heavy gunfire thanks to the tunnels, something that surface fortifications were unable to do. And it turned into the ultimate test of bravery for the guys deployed to battle in those tunnels. The weapons and tactics of the tunnel rats. The tunnel rats lived by their own laws, carrying whatever weaponry provided them with an advantage in the cramped underground battlefields. Standard infantry rifles were unusable in the narrow tunnel because they were too lengthy to move and too powerful, with muzzle explosions that might deafen shooters in small quarters. Rather, these experts tailored their arsenals to the particular requirements of fighting in tunnels. Because of its dependability, no jamming in muddy situations, and 6 guaranteed shots before reloading, the .38 special revolver gained popularity. To avoid snagging on the tunnel walls, a few rats filed down the front sights. Others favored the whisper-quiet operation of the little Browning high power, or even .25 caliber handguns. Sawed-off shotguns were a vicious option in confined spaces because of their loud explosion and recoil, but they also had deadly stopping power up close. For tunnel work, every piece of equipment was changed. Rats employed tiny, one-handed angle headlights since the standard supplied flashlights were too large. Before approaching death zones, several people extended their lights around corners to attract enemy fire by taping them to sticks. For easy access when fighting in the dark, knives were attached to thighs or boots. Some had handcrafted tunnel knives with them, small double-edged blades ideal for quiet work. Cruel experience led to the evolution of tactics. To save ammo and avoid confusion from shooting echoes, teams created the 3-shot rule, firing no more than 3 rounds at each target. Instead of taking the chance of moving past concealed dangers, they would frequently tie ropes around the bodies of enemy fighters they killed to bring them back to the surface for identification. Gas turned into a 2-pronged weapon. CS gas could eliminate defenders, but it also filled the tunnels with dazzling clouds that were indifferent to allies and enemies. It was very hard to communicate below. While some experimented with throat microphones, the majority relied on touch signals or whispers. By practicing, the top teams were able to anticipate each other's motions and move like shadows. They followed their gut more than anything else. If a tunnel seemed off, they retreated. Their caustic Latin slogan, non gradum anus rodentum, not worth a rat's ass, often appeared on handmade patches that featured cartoon rats with guns, displaying their dark humor. They went underground despite knowing the odds, which encapsulated their mindset wonderfully. The tunnel rats' ability to adapt conventional combat to a setting where norms didn't apply, rather than merely their equipment, was what made them effective. Creativity and bravery were equally important for survival in the tunnels, and these experts possessed both in spades. The dangers of silence and isolation. In a world where sound meant survival and sight became worthless, the tunnel rats lived in what may have been the most mentally taxing condition in contemporary combat. Below ground, the norms of fighting disintegrated into dreadful ambiguity. The complete blackness was a tangible presence that pressed against the body and psyche, not merely a lack of light. Every regulated breath, every heartbeat, and every scrape of cloth on dirt seemed abnormally loud in this setting. Attempts to keep in touch early on failed miserably. Rats were left stranded without communication when field telephones with trailing cables repeatedly caught on rock outcroppings and roots. When users needed to be silent, the experimental bone phones, throw microphones that sent vibrations, failed. Whispering might reveal a soldier's location to enemy fighters who were waiting and were familiar with all the echoes and reverberations coming from their tunnels. While American soldiers were deaf strangers in hostile terrain, the Viet Cong had spent years analyzing the acoustic qualities of their underground network. A few tunnel rats experimented using headlights, but soon gave them up. The shadows cast by the beam's reflection off the tunnel walls were confusing. Even worse, they made the wearer's head an ideal target. Some veterans claimed to have seen bullet holes in tunnel walls grouped at head height. By using their lights like sniper scopes, the most skilled operators were able to identify targets in a split second before shooting from memory. Others used methods such as lighting the ground to create illuminating upward shadows. Even seasoned troops saw unanticipated effects from the solitude. Time became warped in the absence of visual cues. minutes seemed to stretch into hours. Even the most disciplined operators became exhausted by the continual stress of anticipating an assault at any time. Some claimed to have had hallucinations of sounds or movements in the shadows, fabricating threats in their thoughts. The best tunnel rats developed the ability to discriminate between the faint noises of an impending attacker and the typical settling of the soil. A little metal scrape and the barely noticeable click of a safety being released became life-or-death alerts. The Viet Cong mercilessly took advantage of this lack of sense. At random intervals, they would tap on the tunnel walls, making up rhythms to trick trespassers. To mimic fighters in the area, some people recorded Vietnamese whispers. Complete stillness was the most terrifying strategy. Skilled Viet Cong troops might stand still for hours, waiting for tunnel rats to pass before launching a surprise attack. The cost of this psychological conflict was high. After very terrifying missions, many tunnel rats experienced what they dubbed tunnel shakes, uncontrollable shaking. After their service finished, several discovered that they were no longer able to fit inside tight spaces. Their capacity to decipher subtle environmental cues and their hyper-awareness of sound, which made them efficient underground, occasionally translated into crippling sensitivities in everyday life. But mission after mission, these soldiers kept going down into the darkness. They created their coping strategies, such as utilizing their weapons as tactile cues in the dark, counting steps to stay oriented, and chewing gum to control their respiration. The most effective turned the Viet Cong's greatest advantage into their weapon by learning to love the silence rather than dread it. The human senses and spirit were the most important survival tools in the tunnels, as technology failed and traditional strategies proved ineffective. Some tunnel rats became so good at their job that they were even feared by the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong's most wanted. One name on Hanoi's most wanted list among the many American soldiers who served in Vietnam wasn't there, at least not by traditional military criteria. One sergeant and 9 senior officers, all generals, were on the North Vietnamese Army's kill list. This one NCO had earned his position by pure hard work, and Viet Cong soldiers were so intimidated by him that they put a price on his head that was comparable to what division commanders received. Rumors from the battlefield and whispered stories helped to build the mythology. One American, according to Viet Cong fighters, slipped through their tunnel networks like a ghost, showing up out of the blue and vanishing before reinforcements could reach them. His unique strategy of firing precisely 3 bullets in each encounter turned into a horrifying trademark. Since this tunnel rat could kill several adversaries with just 3 bullets, some Viet Cong started to think the 3-shot rule was magical. The truth was more pragmatic. It symbolized controlled firing in a setting where preserving ammunition was essential to life. The Viet Cong's customary indifference to individual soldiers was what made this sergeant stand out on the most wanted list. Instead of frontline combatants, their propaganda usually centered on rival leaders and systems. But because of how much this tunnel rat had interfered with operations, local commanders gave their forces special orders to find and kill him. In villages, there were reward posters that offered promotions, cash, or food in exchange for information that led to his demise. Although opinions on whether the codename translates to the Ghost or Black Shadow, captured records showed that the Viet Cong had assigned him one. On both sides, the sergeant's reputation grew. American forces exchanged wildly inflated tales. He had cleared entire tunnel complexes by himself. He could smell Viet Cong in complete darkness, and enemy soldiers had fled their posts when they learned he was in their area. According to some reports, he had sustained several wounds, but continued to fight. Others said that he had never been struck since the tunnels themselves had shielded him. The enigma surrounding this sergeant poses important queries regarding how fighters in contemporary warfare become legendary. His reputation developed naturally via the most potent military network, the first-hand recollections of those who fought beside and against him, without the aid of the media or official acknowledgement. This tunnel rat accomplished a unique feat in an irregular conflict where territory was continually shifting hands and body counts were insignificant. He turned into a psychological weapon that was more dreaded than any technological advancement. Perhaps the greatest honor from an adversary that held few American soldiers in high regard is his inclusion on that most wanted list among generals and senior commanders. It recognized what the Viet Cong hardly ever acknowledged, that a single resolute soldier acting independently within their territory might gain as much strategic importance as any general with his battalions and charts. The tunnels had provided the ideal setting for a legend to develop, and this sergeant had become just that, a legend that both opponents and allies discussed in secret. But who was he? The legend revealed: Sergeant Robert Batten. There was now a name for the ghost that haunted the Viet Cong tunnels. Sergeant Robert "Batman" Batten, the most feared tunnel rat during the Vietnam War. Batten frightened the adversary more than any other tunnel rat that crept into the shadows. Not only did the Viet Cong want him dead, but they needed him gone. Because combatants thought he traveled through the soil like a ghost, his reputation had turned into a strategic issue. Batten's remarkable underground navigation skills got him his call sign, not comic books. He tracked opponents by deciphering subtle noises, such as a shifting stone or a hushed breath, much like a bat utilizing echolocation in complete darkness. He used the 3-shot rule for tactical effectiveness, not superstition. Batten made every bullet meaningful in tunnels where every shot mattered. His fighting history was a work of fiction. It took Batten's crew 3 days to remove a tunnel complex that was a large problem during Operation Crimp in 1966. They used strategically placed explosives to bring down entire sections of Viet Cong combatants, flushing out more than 150 of them. His strategies, booby-trapping deserted passageways, shooting 3 rounds before moving, and disguising sentries in enemy uniforms, became standard practice. Batten's almost legendary survival instinct was on display during the grenade incident in Cu Chi. Batten and his lieutenant had only seconds to respond when an opposing fighter threw a fragmentation grenade into the tunnel. Despite having their legs torn by shrapnel, they managed to crawl 200 meters to safety. From Batten's body, the medics later removed 17 pieces of metal. He was back on duty in a few weeks. Batten was unique not only because of his skill, but also because he comprehended the enemy's mindset. His analysis of Viet Cong tunnel designs taken during raids revealed trends in the locations of traps and escape routes. Batten saw a system, and he learned to disrupt it, where others saw haphazard holes in the earth. Although recovered records mentioned a black-clad demon, with a price equal to 5 years' worth of Viet Cong soldier wages, the military never formally verified the bounty on Batten's head. His mythology became so widespread that some historians think the Viet Cong changed the layout of the tunnels, especially to undermine his strategies. 2 bronze stars and 4 purple hearts are but an indication of Batten's influence. The stories of Viet Cong detainees who described a subterranean spirit that was unkillable are more revealing. Batten accomplished something uncommon in a conflict that was tallied by the number of casualties and the amount of land captured. He became a psychological weapon that was more dreaded than airstrikes or artillery barrages. After 3 tours, Batten eventually returned home, leaving a legacy that went beyond awards. The tale of Batman persisted despite the tunnels, serving as a reminder that in combat, a single resolute soldier may occasionally alter the course of a whole battlefield. The legacy of tunnel rats. Military history will never be the same after the tunnel rats of Vietnam demonstrated that bravery and resourcefulness could overcome even the strongest fortifications. Despite fighting a war in the dark, they had a profound influence, interrupting enemy activities, obtaining vital intelligence, and transforming the Viet Cong's greatest advantage into a battlefield they created. The rats' mission waned as several tunnel networks were finally destroyed by American bombing attacks, but their mythology persisted. Stories of warriors like Batten and Rejo were passed down as examples of what resolute troops might do in the face of overwhelming adversity, and they came to represent an unshakable resolve. As a chilling reminder of the war's ruthless inventiveness, the Cu Chi tunnels remain intact today. Those who battled underground never fully recovered from the experience. The weight of the darkness, heightened senses, and claustrophobia persisted long after they got home. Since their strategies impacted subterranean and urban warfare doctrine, their legacy endures in contemporary special operations. More than tactics, though, They symbolized a reality of combat. Often, the most courageous conflicts are waged in quiet, alone, and on pure nerves rather than weaponry. Despite their small size, the tunnel rats' bravery was evident and will always be remembered in the history of combat as the soldiers who gazed into the abyss and didn't flinch. If you were there during that time, would you have become a tunnel rat? Tell us in the comments, and thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.